Delivering the keynote address, dawn of a new age, COVID-19 reflections, and the way forward for businesses. A very warm welcome, Mr. Gupta, and if you may, anytime. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Minister Teo, Dr. Chong, all the folks in the room, and all of those of you who are online, good morning. I'm very delighted to be able to come and speak. The energy in this room is palpable, and I suspect it reflects the capacity, the ability to get together again in person. I think that's tremendously exciting. I have to say I feel privileged to be in this August company. August for two reasons. One, there are a bunch of very smart, super smart techies, I suspect, both in this room and online. I don't have a computer science background, and therefore I feel very honored to be led into this August forum. Though I was reflecting as telling the minister, in truth today, I believe there is no more technology sector and no more technology industry. Every company, every industry in the world is tech. And therefore, if you haven't figured and understood how to leverage, use, and deal with tech, you're a dinosaur. The second reason I'm privileged is because given all of this focus on women, I was very inspiring, 100 women, young girls, etc. I was beginning to feel a little bit lonely out there. But I have to say that partly it's really inspiring. Last part, I often joke, DBS we're privileged. Most of our senior leadership is women. And I sometimes say, my job is to look pretty, the women run the bank. But also I suspect the reason I'm good is happy is my feminine side is quite well developed, so I think I'm not a bad company either. Alright, what I'm going to do in the next 10 or 15 minutes is reflect on some of the mega trends which we've seen over the last couple of years. Maybe talk a little bit about how these are going to shape the way forward, where I think the world is likely to go. And perhaps talk a little bit about things which Minister mentioned as well. What are the safety, the OB markers, the safety boundaries, and tangentially therefore reflect on reset or rebuild. This has been a pivotal moment without a doubt, and a lot of the challenges and issues have obviously been epidemiological, but I think it also brought together many expand trends. It brought together many things that were happening, in fact brought us to a tipping point on many of those. And I'm going to reflect on three. One's, by the way, when I heard Minister your speech, I figured I was probably redundant, I could go home because my three are pretty much the same as your three. The first, hyper-digitalization. I'm going to take it a little bit forward. There's some technology trends which I think have reached tipping point. So I want to talk a little bit about that. The second is the whole sustainability agenda, particularly the E and S of the ESG movement. And finally, this whole idea of stakeholder versus shareholder capitalism, the idea of purpose. You spoke to values in society in your third section, Minister. On the hyper-digitalization theme, it goes without saying that what we've seen in the last 2 years is a dramatic increase in digital consumption. And that's something that you've got to take away. Digital consumption was already increasing in the last 20 years, ever since Amazon launched the retail bookstore, etc. But what we've seen in the last 2 years is what McKinsey said, 10 years of digital change, hyper-digitalization happened in 3 months. And we saw it in industry after industry. So you take education. Places like Coursera existed for a period of time, but who would have thought that the entire K-12 education space and the entire tertiary education space could go online and live online for 2 years back to back? But that's happened. So people are getting more and more used to being educated in the formal and informal, by not just that, corporate learning, etc., the whole scheme. You take medicine. For the longest time, people have talked about teleconsulting, telemedicine, etc., never took off, except in the last 2 years. And now, telemedicine has become a reality. Gaming, it's obviously been taking off for a long time, but in the last 2 years, the dramatic increase in esports, e-gaming and e-entertainment, just speaks to the tremendous amount of digital consumption that's beginning to happen. And finally, if you look at my industry in financial services, we've been trying to get more and more people to get digital, mobile, enabled, etc. for years. I can tell you that we saw more acceleration in this trend in 2020 and 2021 than we had in the 5 years previous to that. Particularly interesting was people over 60. Generally speaking, people over 60 were hard to get to move to mobile and internet. Last year, 4x increase. And frankly, we didn't have a choice. We were locked up at home, and you couldn't get out. There was, circuit breaker. What do you do? And we helped people to do that. But this whole idea of digital consumption having taken off at pace is important. By the way, it's not just individuals. You look at the SME universe. In our own SME customer base, the number of people who now deal with the bank entirely digitally, from opening an account, getting their loans, giving their trade talks, nobody comes to the bank anymore. That's seen a step function change. And finally, it's at large corporates. As the supply chain started getting hammered last year, the large companies started realizing that supply chain transparency is critical. And it's not just who's selling to you, but the second, third, and fourth order magnitude, who's selling to the seller and who's selling to the seller's seller. And to get the supply chain transparency, large companies doubled down on their efforts to digitize their own supply chain. Again, our volumes in that space last year were just dramatically increased, and they just told us how much the shift in consumption is taking place across the entire spectrum. So to me, this is the first thing we got to recognize, that digital consumption is on us. I was fortunate to be a member of the Emerging Stronger Task Force under the DBS. And when we started thinking about where do we take Singapore forward, how do we define a future for the country, the first thing we decided to anchor ourselves on is this idea of digital consumption. Because this digital consumption gives us an opportunity to really start expanding beyond our geographic boundaries. We've always been an export-oriented country. But now it's quite clear that the world is a marketplace. Because if people can consume digitally, there's no reason for us not to be able to offer services around the whole spectrum. This idea, therefore, anchored this tagline we came up with, which said virtually unlimited Singapore. Because we do think it's virtual, but virtual makes it unlimited. So I think it's an important trend. It's an important trend for people in general, certainly an important trend for all of us in Singapore. The other related thing to technologies which I think are coming on us though, one is obviously data and AI. It's been on us for the last 15, 20 years. It's been gathering pace. But again, in the last 2 years, I saw an exponential pickup in the use of data and AI. I mean, you guys are all, you folks are all very more accomplished in understanding the challenges and issues with this. But I have to say that without a doubt, this is a complete game changer. It's redefining the way every business is done, and certainly in banking. Today we're using AI for everything. Credit systems, our marketing systems, our human resource systems, our compliance activities, our audit activities, our servicing, everything is increasingly AI powered. We have thousands of AI and machine learning models already in operation. And we're not the only one. I mean, company after company is doing this. So I think there is a step function change in the use of AI. Now the problem with this was what we just heard. How do you drive ethics in AI? How do you drive trust in AI? How do you make sure models are suitable? At DBS a couple of years ago, we came up with an ethical use of AI committee, and we came up with a framework called PURE. So AI should be purposeful, unsurprising, respectful, and explainable, PURE. But in reality, when we try to put it into effect, it's very hard. It's not easy. Because the issues that you have to deal with are not issues of STEM. They're issues of the social sciences. They're issues of morality. The issues of what makes us who we are, the issues of what the society, what makes society society. Let me give you two examples and tell you to define the scale of the problem. You take, first of all, our role as a bank. As banks, as reflecting to Minister Piyush, we've been taught, my training has always been around a very simple basis that you must be good at credit, which means you must know who to lend money to and who not to lend money to. You lend money to people who are credit worthy and will return the money, because it's not my money. It's the depositor's money or the shareholder's money. Now what happens when I use an AI model to make the same judgment? Who should we lend money to and who not? Suddenly the alert signals go up. Oh, the computer is making decisions on who's credit worthy and who's not. Is it redlining? Is it doing ethnic bias? Is it doing gender bias? Well, guess what? When my credit analysts have been doing this for the last 40 years, they've been using the same judgment. They've been using judgment on ethnicity, data, etc., but it's in their head. Now we try to codify it into a model that becomes a problem. Where do you draw the line? I'll give you an even more compelling example. You think about the insurance sector, the insurance industry. The nature of the insurance industry is based on a simple premise that we don't know. And because we don't know, we're willing to socialize losses. Since none of us knows who's going to get cancer in this room, we are quite happy to all put a little money in the kitty, which is our premium, and then the person who gets hit gets to be able to take that money. Now what happens when the data tells us and we know, and AI and genomics and gene technology takes us to the point we know for sure that Piyush is going to get cancer, and you're not going to get cancer, sir. End of story. Because you don't want to pay the premium, you're sure you're not going to get cancer, nobody wants to insure me anymore. So how do you solve this problem? Is there a point you get to when you say too much information is not good, too much AI is not good, or rather, how do we as society deal with these questions of morality and ethics which are going to determine what makes us human, what makes us a society? So the technology is on us, change is going to happen. We will have to try and think differently, but we have to stay anchored in recognizing fundamental truths and principles of what makes us who we are. A second technology which is on us, is going to be game-changing, is blockchain, distributed ledger. It's game-changing because it fundamentally destroys the architecture of the world we built, which is a hub and spoke system. Everything today, all value is recorded in hubs. The bank knows how much money you have because I keep record. The central bank, MES, knows how much money I have because it keeps record. The registrar society knows who owns the house because they keep the record. Somebody keeps the record. What happens in a world where everybody is keeping the record? You don't need the hubs. And the minute you don't need the hubs, you're talking about a completely different architecture of not just finance, but the business world. Do you need stock exchanges? Do you need banks? Do you need any central authorities? But when you start going down that path, it comes with a lot of attendant risk. China saw that 2 years ago. They had the P2P lending boom. Everybody was lending to everybody. And then suddenly in 12 months, they had to shut down 4,000 P2P companies because the infrastructure and the capacity to put controls around the system to understand the risks that could arise, it did not exist. So as we start thinking about moving to a DeFi world, a distributed ledger world, a blockchain world, it will come with a lot of risk. And I'm not just talking cryptocurrency and crypto coins and trading. I'm talking, if you tokenize everything, what does a fractionalized token mean? What does ownership of 0.001% of an NFT mean? How do we deal with that again in society in terms of what value we create? And again, we'll go back to the question of fundamental notions. Where does value lie? If somebody pays $68 million for an NFT, that NFT is a virtual token. Why is there value in it? But then you start thinking, why is there value in a Mona Lisa painting? I mean, anybody can see it. You can go to the Louvre, you can get it on a computer. Why do people put value? So you start questioning the fundamentals of value. What causes value to be created? Again, this is not a STEM question. This is not a STEM question. This is not even an economics question. It's a philosophy question. And therefore, to me, as we start thinking about the future, the trends are on us. But we're really going to have to start thinking about the soft sciences and some of these questions very, very hard. The third trend I'm not going to talk too much about. I think 5G is really going to drive the metaverse. So it's really the bandwidth and latency. But what that will let you do is both AR and VR at scale. And the only thing I'll leave in your head is if you do that, can you imagine Squid Games happening all around us all the time? It's a bit of a money. All right, quickly switching on to the second big theme, sustainability. I think what the pandemic made very clear is two things from an environmental and green standpoint. Number one, it brought sharp focus and recognition to the fact that tail risks happen, tail risks occur. And the pandemic was a tail risk. The truth is climate change and biodiversity loss is not even a tail risk. It is an extended, it's a happening risk. It's just something which is not in our focus. But I think one of the good things in the last 2 years is that it's got tremendous degree of focus on the recognition that both biodiversity loss as well as climate change are on us. And we have to grapple and deal with it. We just cannot keep pushing it aside, otherwise it will be like the pandemic on steroids. The other better part of the news that happened over the last couple of years though, is the recognition that when we are really pushed to the wall, when we have a gun to the head, we as mankind find the resources. The big debate has always been, this is going to cost us trillions of dollars to redo the carbon into a carbon light economy. Well, guess how much money we spent in the last 2 years on the pandemic? Last I counted about $30 trillion. Between the fiscal support policies of $16, $17 trillion and the monetary support policies rolled out around the world, $30 trillion. That's over a third. That's almost 40% of global GDP. We dipped into our pockets for over 18 months. Now, if we can find the resources to do that for the pandemic, surely we can find resources to deal with what I think are bigger, more looming threats, which is the climate issue and the biodiversity issue. Well, one of the things that happened, which I think was positive, is more and more companies and organizations and governments took heed of that. In Singapore, we came up with our own green plan and building back a better plan. Europe came up with the whole the EU Green Fund. The Biden administration put in a couple of $1 trillion in trying to rebuild and build back better. So I think there's a clear understanding that we need to put some resources to work. In the last 2 years, almost 1,800 companies around the world have made net zero commitments. And the 2050 commitments, the cynical part of me says everybody will be gone by then, so it's quite easy to make the commitment. But I'm also encouraged because people are now putting milestones to the commitments. What do we need to get done by 2025? What do we need to get done by 2030? This is going to be obviously on the one side a big change. There will be a lot of creative destruction. Industries will go. The internal combustion industry is going to come under pressure. The energy industry, as we know, is going to come under pressure. But new industries are going to be formed. On the back of that shift, there is going to be a tremendous opportunity. I calculate there's going to be $1 trillion of financing opportunity for banks like us over the next few years. But this comes back to the same thing. You cannot go from A to B overnight. And this is the key thing that we are going to all have to grapple with in a very compelling kind of way. That there has to be a transition. And these transition pathways have to be thought through. When I work with clients, we say, okay, you're a brown industry, or a coal, or gas, energy industry. To expect to shut down overnight. You see what's happening in Europe, you see what's happening in China, you see what's happening in Australia, because the base load for power is suddenly coming under critical pressure. So you can't do that. Because there is people have to live, people have to go, economies have to grow. But you have to come up with a pathway from brown to light brown, and light brown to light green, and light green to green. So how do you determine those pathways, and how do you actually recalibrate to a better carbon light business model? Cannot be done overnight. There must be a transition pathway, you need to work on that actively. Similarly, the other part of ESG, the S. One of the great things, other things that happened in the last 2 years is the recognition that we're going to have to do a lot more for the base level of society, the bottom of the pyramid, if you will, or the bottom 20%. And it's also quite clear that if you don't do that, you're going to have civil strife and social reward. And so you don't have a choice, you have to start addressing it. Again, the fact that in the last 18 months, it was the frontline workers, the bus drivers, the store attendants, etc., who kept the economy going, has become quite clear to people. And therefore, there is a concerted agenda for most governments to try and address this. How do you shift and shape economic development to take care of some of this? When President Xi in China talks about common prosperity, this is what he's talking about. And I think you will find in country after country a renewed emphasis on driving this common prosperity agenda. It has a tremendous opportunity for technology, because some of the problems can be solved by technology today that could not be before. In our industry, for example, financial inclusion has been a big mantra. It's well known, the research has shown that the more people are in the formal financial system, the better the overall economic outcomes are for these people. But the cost of access has been very high. Today that's changing. And today you can actually use digital technologies to get to the bottom of the pyramid very, very quickly. One thing, let me give you an example. In the summer of last April or May, when the domestic worker problem started happening in Singapore, and we decided that we must put them into quarantine in the workshop, there were two big challenges. Suddenly you put all these people there. They're allowed to go down to the little shop to buy some stuff, but they didn't have cash. And so I got a call from somebody in the government saying, hey, can DBS help to put some pop-up ATMs everywhere, which we did. But the bigger challenge for them was they couldn't go to Lucky Plaza to send the money back home or to wherever they were going. Well, because the technology lets you do it, we rolled out and did a 4x increase in digital accounts over 4 weeks. And we enrolled another 150,000 migrant labor who could then transfer money on their mobile phone everywhere they needed to go without having to go to Lucky Plaza. So technology changes everything. But this transition again, to move to a more common prosperity world, will have to be calibrated. It has to be calibrated because you cannot shrink the pie. You need to figure out how you redistribute the pie. The last thing I want to talk about very quickly was this idea of purpose. This shareholder-stakeholder debate has been with us since 1975 when Milton Friedman wrote his famous article on the fact that the only purpose a company has is to generate a profit for the shareholder. And by the way, Friedman is not a callous man. He's a very thinking man. His point was very simple, that if you want to do good, it's not you who should be doing good, you're an agent. You give the money back to the shareholder, let the shareholder do the good. And an easy way to think about it is if I give you money to invest, you say, give me 10% return. At the end of the period, you say, I'm only giving you 5, the other 5 I did some good for you. Why I say, give me my 10%, I do my own good. Right? So that was Friedman's point. But it's quite, I'm fundamentally in a different camp. I think companies have their own responsibility. We're not just agents. And when we're given legal life, we're also given a legal responsibility. We've got to live up to the legal responsibility. We get a license from civil society, not just a license from the authorities. The license from civil society is earned and can only be earned by being relevant. And so it's, I think, increasingly the case today that people and companies are beginning to go down the path. The Business Leaders Roundtable a couple of years ago in the US had some of the biggest business leaders sign up for this. The World Business Council on Sustainable Development, I'm the exco of that. We've done a lot of work around this as well. I think this trend of recognizing the social and community role of businesses is on us. But again, we've got to get balanced. Because at the end of the day, if you do not have a profit agenda, and if you don't have an economic growth agenda, you don't wind up creating the best outcomes. And we've seen that in cases like the Soviet Union and the collapse of the Soviet Union. I'm going to stop there, but string the 3 trends together in my comments. It essentially takes me to the point that I don't think the question is reset or rebuild. I think the answer is you've got to reset and rebuild. And the reason for that is that you cannot create a discussion is good. We need to go to a brave new world. There are a lot of things that are happening. There's going to be massive change in the last 10 years, but we need to stay anchored. And we need to stay anchored in some of the things that we have built as people, as societies, as humanities, and as economic systems that we know work. And we have to take those and we have to build on top of them. We've got to reset and rebuild so you wind up in a better place and a better future. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Gupta. Please be careful your feet. Ladies and gentlemen, now we know